Here's the full 20-paragraph story, crafted in long, emotional paragraphs, each around 10 lines to suit your request for a 15-minute YouTube narration. Abandoned at the station, come with me, said the widower. Wild West love stories. The night was quiet, save for the low whistle of the departing train, its smoke drifting across the lonely station. The lamps flickered, casting long shadows over the wooden planks where a young woman stood trembling, her worn shawl clutched tightly against the chill. The crowd had vanished with the train's departure, leaving her utterly alone, her eyes red from holding back tears. She had been promised a future, a man who said he loved her, and yet when the whistle blew, he never came. Abandoned, she felt the crushing weight of rejection settle in her chest. Her dreams of belonging in a wild, unforgiving land had shattered in an instant, leaving only the hollow echo of her own sobs in the silence. Her name was Clara, a woman who had left everything familiar behind, clinging to the promise of love and safety in this rugged frontier. She had traveled days by train, filled with hope and courage, rehearsing in her mind the words she would say to the man who had written her letters. But as the night deepened and the platform emptied, the cruel truth revealed itself: he had lied, or worse, changed his mind. Alone, with no money, no family, and no direction, Clara stood frozen, feeling the vastness of the West swallow her. The wooden bench offered little comfort, yet she sat, praying silently for strength, wondering why fate had dealt her such a merciless hand. Her fingers traced the edge of a letter now wrinkled in her pocket, the last she had received from the man who was meant to meet her. She had risked her life and reputation to come this far, believing she was worthy of love, worthy of a home. But as the night air grew colder, fear slithered into her heart. What would become of her now? The town ahead was unfamiliar, filled with strangers who might not welcome her kind presence. Clara closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I cannot go back." Yet going forward seemed just as impossible. The station creaked in the wind, a ghostly reminder that she had been left behind, discarded like an unwanted package. Just as her hope began to crumble, the sound of boots echoed softly across the station floor. Clara startled, pulling her shawl tighter, her eyes darting toward the figure approaching. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low, his steps steady. His face carried the wear of hardship, lines etched from years under the sun, but his eyes were kind, though shadowed with sorrow. He paused when he saw her, this fragile woman sitting alone under the weak glow of the lamps. He didn't speak at once, but in his silence was a gentleness that felt safer than the words of any stranger. Clara swallowed, unsure whether to trust or flee. The man finally spoke, his voice deep and weathered, "You're waiting for someone." It wasn't a question, more a statement of understanding. Clara nodded, unable to find the strength for words, her throat thick with grief. He studied her for a moment, as though piecing together the story that hung in the air between them. She feared his judgment, that he might mock her like others would. But instead, he removed his hat respectfully and lowered his gaze. "Looks like they didn't come." Those words, simple yet piercing, broke the dam of Clara's resolve, and tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness, but the man did not turn from her sorrow. His name was Samuel, a widower who had known the bitterness of loss more than most. His wife had died 2 winters past, leaving him with a daughter and a heart that had forgotten how to hope. He had come to the station that night for supplies, not expecting to stumble upon a scene that mirrored his own grief in another soul's eyes. Something stirred in him as he watched Clara, not desire, but a recognition of loneliness, the kind that eats a person from the inside. He sat beside her quietly, offering no empty comfort, only his presence, which in itself was more powerful than words. For the first time that night, Clara felt she was not invisible. Samuel's little girl, Mary, appeared a moment later, running up the platform to her father. She was no more than 7, her golden braids bouncing as she clutched a small bundle of treats. She stopped suddenly when she saw Clara, her curious eyes wide with innocence. "Papa," she whispered, tugging at his sleeve, "why is the lady crying?" Samuel glanced at Clara, giving her the choice to explain or remain silent. Clara forced a smile, though her lips trembled. I'm just a little lost," she said softly. Mary, in her childlike way, stepped forward and reached for Clara's hand, her touch pure and unknowing of judgment. "Then come with us," Mary said simply. "Papa always helps lost things." Clara froze at the child's words, her heart aching with the kindness she had not expected. Samuel cleared his throat, awkward yet sincere. "She don't mean no harm," he said gently, "but she's right. You shouldn't stay here alone." Clara hesitated, torn between fear and desperate need. To follow strangers was a risk, but to remain here, abandoned and exposed, was a greater danger. Something in Samuel's steady gaze told her he was a man of honor, not one to deceive or take advantage. And the warmth in Mary's innocent grip was enough to tip the scale. For the first time that night, Clara whispered, "Thank you," allowing herself to rise from the bench of despair. The walk back to Samuel's modest ranch was quiet, filled with the sounds of crickets and the crunch of boots on dirt. Clara held Mary's small hand tightly, drawing comfort from her presence, while Samuel walked just ahead, a silent guardian in the night. When they arrived, Clara's eyes widened at the humble cabin, its porch lantern glowing warmly against the dark. It wasn't grand, but it felt alive, filled with traces of love and hardship intertwined. Samuel opened the door, offering her a seat by the fire. Clara's eyes stung as she stepped inside. It had been so long since she had felt the warmth of belonging. Though a stranger, she was welcomed without question, and that alone began to stitch the first tear in her heart. Days turned into weeks, and Clara found herself slowly weaving into the fabric of Samuel's life. She cooked meals, helped tend the small garden, and most importantly, grew close to Mary, who adored her with the innocent devotion of a child. Yet doubts lingered in Clara's mind. She was a woman abandoned, unwanted, and she feared Samuel's kindness was only pity. But Samuel watched her quietly, admiring her resilience, her gentle care, and the way she breathed life back into his grieving household. One evening, as the sun set crimson over the plains, Samuel found himself whispering a prayer he hadn't uttered since his wife's passing, gratitude for the unexpected gift of a second chance. Clara, too, wrestled with her heart. The memory of being abandoned haunted her, whispering lies that she was unworthy of love. But each day, Samuel's steady presence and Mary's innocent affection chipped away at the walls she had built. One night, while tucking Mary into bed, the little girl whispered, "I hope you stay forever." Clara's heart tightened, tears slipping down her cheeks as she kissed the child's forehead. She wanted to believe it was possible, to find home, to find family, but fear of being left again held her back. Still, the seed of hope had been planted, and it grew stronger with every sunrise. Trouble eventually came, as it always does in the West. A drought struck the land, leaving Samuel's crops withered and his cattle weak. The burden of survival pressed heavily upon his shoulders, threatening to undo the fragile peace he had found. Clara worked tirelessly beside him, her hands blistered, her spirit unwavering. When Samuel's despair nearly overcame him, Clara reminded him of the strength he had shown in raising Mary alone. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered, her eyes fierce with determination. In those words, Samuel felt something break free inside him, the realization that this woman was no longer a stranger, but a partner sent by fate itself. As the weeks wore on, Clara's courage and faith carried them through the hardship. Neighbors noticed the change in Samuel, once a man of silence and sorrow, now softened by hope. Though life remained difficult, there was laughter in the cabin once more, and love stitched together what loss had once torn apart. Clara, abandoned at the station, had found the very thing she thought she had lost forever, a family. Samuel, the widower, discovered that even in the barren land of grief, new love could bloom. And Mary, the little girl who reached out her hand, became the bond that tied two broken souls together. One quiet evening, as stars blanketed the sky, Samuel stood with Clara on the porch. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of the earth after a rare rain. He turned to her, his voice low but steady. "When I first saw you at that station, I saw someone as lost as me. I didn't know then what God had in store, but now I see it clear. Clara, you weren't abandoned, you were brought to us." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but they were no longer from sorrow, they were tears of healing, of love rediscovered. She leaned into his embrace, her heart finally daring to believe in happiness again. The story of Clara and Samuel became a quiet legend in the town, whispered by neighbors who saw how love had transformed them. They weren't rich, nor free of hardship, but they were whole. Clara had arrived a broken woman, and Samuel had lived as a man of loss, yet together they had built something far greater than either could have alone. Their home was filled with laughter, their fields with determination, and their hearts with a love that outshone every trial. Mary grew knowing that miracles come in the simplest forms, a hand extended, a word of kindness, and the courage to say, "Come with me." And so, the girl who was abandoned at the station found not just shelter, but a purpose, a family, and a love that endured. The widower who once thought his life had ended discovered that sometimes, second chances arrive when least expected. In the wild, unforgiving land of the West, their story shone as a testament to resilience and faith. For love, as they had learned, is not bound by perfect beginnings, but by the strength to hold on, to heal, and to believe once more. Would you like me to also format this into a proper YouTube script version with narration tone, pacing cues, and emotional pauses so it flows perfectly in a 15-minute voiceover?